And we're back. This is the third lecture for the week that starts Monday, the 2nd of November, 2020, the day before the American election. So, we have discussed the end of the religious wars in the first and the second full-length lecture. We discussed the beginnings of what will be and the bases that were laid for the Age of Exploration, in particular by Prince Henry the Navigator, and his desire to help Portugal get around the bottleneck in trade for silks and spices that led to Europeans getting rooked in the so-called Christian tax. So now we've got the tools. Henry's school at Sagre brought together experienced sea captains, astronomers who were good at navigation, and shipwrights, naval architects who were good at designing ships. And people trained in this system, which eventually spread to other schools, were going to have much more abilities at sea than anyone else. They perfected the nautical compass, which tells cardinal direction. The sextant or the astrolabe, which tells your position in latitude, that's north-south distance. The chronometers they were working on, that will help with longitude, east-west distance. And the Portuguese had developed the caravel, which is a much better ship for exploring seas, much more stable, requiring less crew, less resources, fewer resources than the cog or longship, which was prominent in Northern Europe. And the goal is to circumnavigate Africa. Now, this sort of globe of mine is obviously distorted because it's hand-drawn. But the edges are much bigger here than in the center. Africa is much larger than South America. Africa is second only to Asia in size. Africa is bleeping immense. And this map does not really show how gosh darn big it is. But the Portuguese do quickly find their way around Cape Bojador. This is what they do. They leave Portugal and they go woo out into the ocean. They brave the deep blue sea rather than hug the coast. By braving the deep blue sea, they find currents and wind much more favorable. They find the chance of storms a little less, enough less to make a difference. But the big thing is they can then, by going way out to sea, go around the barrier of Cape Bojador. And eventually, they make their way to the Guinea coast of Africa. Africa suddenly starts going eastward. And the Portuguese are hopeful. Could this be all that there is to Africa? Could Africa stop here? Could they continue sailing eastward? And then, no. Near the island of Fernando Po, the Portuguese realized that Africa is bending south again. This little barrier here prevents you from seeing it. So the Portuguese go south. Now, year by year, the Portuguese get farther and farther along, and they go back and they report their findings. So they get to here, Guinea Coast, hopeful, nah. And every year, to show how far they got, they would plant a marker on the coast on a prominent hill for next year's expedition to find and then sail south of. It was a white cross, a stone cross, big stone cross, whitewashed, painted really, really brilliant white, so that the Portuguese could recognize this thing from miles and miles away through a telescope and say, oh, that's where Sanjurjo's expedition had gotten to last year, so now Franco's expedition will continue south. Those are Spanish rather than Portuguese names. Sorry. In any event, so the Portuguese journeys go farther and farther and farther south along the western shores of Africa, and they have these crosses, many of whom are still there. Many of which are still there. They get to the Namib Desert, where the meerkats are. They'll stand up on their hind feet, meerkats, where the Kung are, the Bushmen. And eventually they find Table Bay. They also find False Bay, which is a ship graveyard. Looks like a beautiful bay, shallow, filled with rocks. But Table Bay is near Table Mountain. It's in the city that we now call Cape Town, South Africa. And then the the Portuguese realize the coast goes east. But this stormy coast becomes even more dangerous, or as dangerous as Cape Bojador. It's actually more dangerous, but it's a barrier. So it isn't until Henry's school is founded in the 1420s or 30s. In 1488, Bartolomeo Diaz heads out from Table Bay and does what the others had done at Cape Bojador. He goes way out to sea and around. And he comes northward to the eastern coast of Africa, and he is past the big bulbous bit. And he's hopeful that this means that he has circumnavigated Africa. So Diaz goes home after reaching here, which is now the coast near Maputo what's that country? Used to be Portuguese East Africa, is now, gosh, what a memory. Mozambique. Near Maputo, Mozambique. It used to be Lorenzo Marques in Portuguese East Africa. Anyway, so Vasco da Gama, Bartolomeo Diaz is rightly given credit for being the first European that we know of to circumnavigate Africa, because he gets here. This is before Columbus. However, it isn't until 6 years after Columbus that Vasco da Gama, following in Diaz's footsteps, he and other Portuguese have come northward to Zanzibar and the Tanzanian coast, and then da Gama decides, to heck with it, I'm going northeast, and I'm going to find India. So da Gama goes whoop across the Indian Ocean and encounters India near Cochin. So da Gama has done it. He has gone around Africa and arrived in the silks and spice markets of India before the Arabs can get a chance to mark up the Christian tax. He buys some stuff. He goes back to Portugal, and he has achieved for Portugal entree into the Indian Ocean trade without having to deal with the Arabs. And their world is never going to be the same. So da Gama completes Henry the Navigator's dream by going around Africa to India and back. And soon the Portuguese are going to be working around the Indian Ocean, displacing the Arabs and setting up trade in the East as well. An admiral named Alameda is going to follow in the early 1500s, defeat several Arab fleets in the Arabian Sea, driving them back, giving Portugal control of the Indian Ocean, and setting up Portuguese trading posts at Cochin and later Goa. Also, an expedition of Admiral Alameda is going to go eastward to the island of Ternate, which is in the heart of the Spice Islands, and an officer on that expedition is a young man named Ferdinand Magellan. Ferdinand Magellan is known to us as Ferdinand Magellan, and he gets as far as Ternate in the east. Okay, I as well draw in the Philippines here, because they're going to be important too. Okay. Then a guy named Albuquerque displaces Alameda, and I think Albuquerque is the one that sets up Goa and sets up permanent trading places in the east. So Portugal is expanding eastward. Now, there's a crazy Genovese sea captain named Cristoforo Colombo, who the Spaniards know as Cristobal Colon, and we know as Christopher Columbus. Cristoforo Colombo is from Genoa, thus he's Genovese. And he has read Ptolemy. Claudius Ptolemy drew a map of the world based on the calculations of Eratosthenes, which determined that the world was round, and measured it using the distance from Syene to Alexandria and the difference in length of the shadows of two identical poles raised at Midsummer's Day at the noontime local. And with geometry, he measured the shape and size of the world. And Eratosthenes was amazingly right. Look at this map that Ptolemy makes based on his calculations. You've got Africa, you've got Europe, you've got India even, and Asia off here. The problem with Ptolemy's map, well, we'll get to that. So Columbus has this map, and he knows the world is round because he's an educated fellow. He's an experienced sea captain. And what Columbus says is, what we got to do is we got to sail west to get to the east. It's a simple, and it's so much easier than sailing around Africa through India. It's a shorter journey. Just look at Ptolemy's map. And he is laughed out of every court that he goes to in Europe until he arrives again for the second time in the court of Ferdinand and Isabella in the consequential year in Spanish history, 1492. Isabella has just driven the Moors out of Spain, and it's celebration time. One of her celebrations is going to take the form of insisting that the Jews leave Spain as well, so that Spain will be an entirely Catholic nation. No more Moors, no more Jews. They're out. If they want to stay, they have to convert, and we're going to use the Spanish Inquisition to make sure they don't backslide. Okay. But there's another thing she does to celebrate. This crazy Genovese has captured her imagination. So she says, yeah, sure, I'll give you 3 ships. Nobody really cares about them. Filled with men, nobody really cares about. Not much. Not important people anyway. You go west. Knock yourself out. And if you come back, maybe we'll have something to talk about. Now, Columbus makes a bunch of demands. Number 1, if he pulls this off, he's going to be known as the Admiral of the Ocean Sea. Secondly, he is going to be perpetual overlord in the name of the Queen and King of Spain for his lifetime of all the lands he discovers. He's going to get a percentage of profits from all the lands that he discovers. And his descendants will continue to hold the title of Admiral of the Ocean Sea and Viceroy for the Kingdom of Spain and ruler of these new lands in the name of the King of Spain. To which the powers within the Spanish court at Madrid say, yeah, sure, fine, whatever. Never going to see him again anyway. So Columbus sails out, a fool that the world had laughed at. Somebody who insisted that his idea was going to be true and not the world's derision. I think an admirable fellow, regardless of the fact that he was a man of his time, and certainly regardless of the fact that a bunch of woke people today want to criticize Columbus for things he never did. In any event, Columbus's journey takes him south to the Canary Islands and then west. Days go by. Weeks go by, still going west on the trade winds, and the crew becomes more and more restive. Columbus, this crazy Genovese, is keeping to his cabin, and his men are afraid that they are getting closer and closer to the gullet of a sea monster or the edge of the world. Ooh. Actually, there's no bottom. They just keep falling forever. So, mutiny is in the air. This mutiny is disrupted by on October the 12th, 1492, land ho! They spot on the island of Santo Domingo a coastline. Santo Domingo is the island that has both Haiti and the Dominican Republic. It's between Cuba and Puerto Rico. There's land here. There's not supposed to be land here. Could the crazy Genovese be right? So Columbus lands, and he finds what he's expecting. He finds jungle islands, tropical jungle islands, filled with strange animals, strange plants, and strange people, the Arawak Indians. strange brown-colored people. This is what he expected to find in Indonesia, in the Spice Islands. This is what he was hoping to get. So he has discovered the way to Asia. He is absolutely convinced. He captures some of the exotic plants and animals, and he brings some of the arawak back to Europe to show that they're real, and that these exotic people are not like anything that the Europeans have ever seen before. And he leaves a little fort and heads back. When he gets back, amazing! This man has done what the Portuguese haven't been able to do in 50 years, simply by being imaginative enough and strong-willed enough to take crews and sail westward on the Nina and the Pinta, which are caravels, and the Santa Maria, which is a nau, which is a slightly larger craft, a little bit less wieldy, a little like a cross between a caravel and a cog. The Nina and the Pinta and the Santa Maria and Columbus come back in late 1492, and it is exultant celebration time. He's found the way to the Spice Islands. He's a success. At this point, reality clicks, and Columbus is called on by the Archbishop Fonseca. The Archbishop Fonseca is the power behind the throne in the Spanish court. He is the confessor of Queen Isabella, and he is in charge of Spain's Roman Catholic Church under the Pope. This man is a prince of the church, one of the most powerful men in Spain, actually I think the most powerful, except for the royal personages who listen to his advice. And Fonseca, who now takes an interest in Columbus, which he didn't before, takes him aside and says, "Chris, walk with me. We both understand that what you've done is an incredible thing, that nobody else believed you, and you turned out to be right. And I acknowledge you're right. That's great. That's wonderful. But we both know that you're not going to be the admiral of the ocean sea for your life to pass it on to your Italian commoner children, this kind of power and title, overlord of the lands you discovered. No. What we've got to do now that this is part of the real world is we've got to give you a proper reward that's in proportion to what you've done, which includes a considerable sum of money, a noble title, and some power in this new land, as well as the job of continuing to explore this new land and eventually finding China, which is the goal, because then we can get the silks too." Now, Columbus, who has been working for decades in the face of the derision of men, powerful men like Fonseca, breaks off and says, "Are you nuts? I finally achieved what nobody thought I could, and now you want to take it? No, I refuse." And he leaves. Fonseca is a patient man. He doesn't need to get angry, because he's going to get even. Columbus goes back, second voyage, 10 ships. Sails around, finds more islands, doesn't find Asia. Oh, when he gets back, he does find that his fort is empty. Apparently, a local Indian chief captured and killed his garrison. So Columbus plays a little trick on the Indian chief. He congratulates the Indian chief on counting coup and offers to give him the luxury bracelets the European prince would wear. And the chief is sold on it, and he allows himself to be put in shackles. Columbus captures him, enslaves his people, and it's exploring and conquest from there. But he doesn't find China, and he doesn't find any recognizable signs of Asia, just more jungle islands filled with primitive natives. So he goes back, and it's not so big a success. And, they say, "Okay, fine. Sure, it's a big world. Let's give you another expedition. You go back, you find it's going to be okay." His third expedition is also a bust. Finally, in his fourth expedition, he does encounter a mainland where there shouldn't be one. He encounters the northern coast of South America, including the mouth of the Orinoco River, one of South America's great rivers. This is clearly a continental landmass, but it's not where China's supposed to be. China's supposed to be up here. and it's not there. So Columbus, after his fourth voyage, is broken by Fonseca, snapped like a twig, and he dies a poor, broken man in Valladolid in Spain, a man who changed the world and who the world then passed by. He did not have a happy ending, poor Christopher Columbus. Like so many inventors and dreamers who changed the world do, he was outdone by the practical men of commerce and politics. Now, as I've talked about on Columbus Day, Columbus is today a political football played by the woke crowd to say how evil America is. Look, Columbus enslaved people, and he did. He was a man of his time. In his time, Europeans had slaves. Indians had slaves. Everyone had slaves. They were either slave owners, or trying to avoid being slaves, or they were slaves. The societies of all the world used slaves as well as serfs, as well as peasants if they were civilized, and just slaves if they weren't, captured people. So Columbus is not a saint, but Columbus also did not intend what happened after he was no longer in power. Columbus is not responsible for the conquest of the Americas. He's responsible for the discovery of the Americas. He's not responsible for all of the evils that have been done in American history, nor is he responsible for all the good. He simply allowed it to happen by establishing contact between Europe and Asia. He was a discoverer, and I think he should be admired within his place as a discoverer and not used as the poster child for every complaint that people on the left have about the American Republic or about European civilization in the Americas or Christianity or whatever else they're protesting this week. Think about it and come to your own conclusions. Now, there's a problem. The problem is that Catholic Spanish Spain has found a way westward to something. I don't know what, something. And Catholic Portugal has found a way east to the Indies and to India, and yes, eventually to China and Japan. What the Pope does not want is Catholic Spain and Catholic Portugal starting a major war with one another over these territories halfway around the world. So, what he establishes is what's known to history as the papal line of demarcation, established at the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. And that treaty basically says that everything west of this line is to be explored exclusively by Spain, converted Christians through Spanish auspices, and economically connected with the European economy. Everything west of this line is going to be Spain's to explore. Everything east of this line is going to be Portugal's, and somewhere on the other side of the world, that line continues. Treaty of Tordesillas, papal line of demarcation. Now, Protestants who hate the Catholics and others who hate European civilization because we conquered the world say, oh, look at the Pope. Look at how arrogant he is. Oh my God, he's splitting the world between Spain and Portugal? Who's he to give Japan to the Portuguese? Who's he to give Mexico to the Spanish? What European hubris? Really? It was designed not to actually say that the kings that live in these other countries are suddenly under Spanish or Portuguese rule. It was about exclusively setting out zones for conquest and colonization that would prevent Spain and Portugal from fighting one another. That's the point. It was later amended in 1529 at the Treaty of Zaragoza because, envy is a thing. And the Spaniards and Portuguese are envious of one another. The Portuguese look at Spain's New World and say, why can't we have some of that? And the Spaniards look at the Asian conquests of Portugal and trading routes and says, why can't we have some of that? They're so sophisticated. They got silk and porcelain and spices. So the treaty is altered at the Treaty of Zaragoza, moving the papal line this way and allowing the Portuguese to get a hold of Brazil. The rest of the New World is Spanish, except for Portugal. And the Spanish to get a hold of the Philippines. The rest of Asia is Portuguese, but the Spanish get the Philippines. And this is going to be a result of Magellan's journey, among other things. So, Treaty of Zaragoza gives the Portuguese and the Spanish a little taste of each other's territory. Now we come to the story that is the capstone of the Age of Exploration, and what I expect to be the end of my lectures this week. The story of Ferdinand Magellan, or Ferdinand Magellan. As a young man in the early 1500s, Magellan becomes an officer of Admiral Almeida. He takes part in the first contact with certain nations in India, in battles with the Arabs, and he leads, or is a leading member of the expedition to the Spice Islands themselves and the island of Ternate in Indonesia. But when Albuquerque comes in the name of the new King John of Portugal, who is not a friend of Almeida or any of his clients, including Ferdinand Magellan. So Albuquerque displaces Almeida and sends all his people, including Magellan, home. In Portugal, Magellan realizes very quickly that the new King John is not going to give him any important job. In fact, he's going to enjoy turning the screws. So Magellan leaves and goes to Spain. Spain is now in the hands of Charles V, who is both King of Spain and Holy Roman Emperor. Charles V, as a very young man, is visited by Magellan, who inspires Charles with the notion of circumnavigation. Magellan's plan to sail completely around the world if he can get a patron to fund his expedition. So, Charles agrees to be that patron. He's the most powerful European Christian monarch. So Magellan gets a fleet of 5 ships. The Trinidad is his flagship, the Holy Trinity, Santísima Trinidad. And this Spanish fleet leaves from Cadiz and heads out, trying to avoid the Portuguese ships, and then arrive in new waters off the coast. He looks for a path through to this, what he hopes is a sea beyond South America. And Magellan is lucky because he finds something that most people who search for it don't find. In fact, Francis Drake is the next European to find it, who isn't part of the Spanish kingdom. Magellan finds a strait, which now is eponymous. It bears his name, the Strait of Magellan, that goes through South America, through the Andes Mountains, and heads out into the Pacific Ocean. It's the strait that separates Tierra del Fuego from the rest of South America. Now, why does this matter? Because the most dangerous seaway in the world is off Cape Horn, and Cape Horn is on Tierra del Fuego. Cape Horn is the southern tip of Tierra del Fuego in South America. There's a little bit of sea, and then there's the northern tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. All of the world's oceans slosh through this narrow space between Cape Horn and the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. This is the worst seaway on Earth, bar none. Today, ships founder and sink because of the rogue waves and storm waves and trouble in the off the coast of Cape Horn. I'm going to show you a film clip, one way or another, that shows what this was like. You could spend months trying to get through there and get nowhere. Cape Horn, the worst seaway in the world, is south of there. But Magellan avoids all of that. He comes through on one of the few pleasant days, and he sees this whole new ocean spread out in front of him. And he says, wow, how peaceful it is. And he calls the biggest, scariest, most wild ocean on earth peaceful, Pacific. Magellan then heads up the Chilean, what is now the Chilean coast, and out into the Pacific. Now, islands to the left of him, islands to the right of him. He is both unlucky and lucky in that he misses them all on his way on his way west by northwest. He's going this way from the South American coast across to Asia. He's unlucky because his men run out of food and water. They start drinking their own urine as well as seawater, and they die of it. And they start eating their own shoe leather, and they get sick of it. So the group of men that arrived in the surviving ship into the Western Pacific are a sorry sight. Weak individuals, bedraggled ships. They come onto a small island and they find water. Oh God, water, fresh water. If you've never been without it, if you've never been really thirsty, you have no idea how wonderful fresh water is. And they also find food. They strengthen themselves and they head further west. Now, that's unlucky, but it's also really lucky. Had they arrived in that weakened condition in the Cannibal Isles of Fiji, or in some of the other islands that do have cannibalism, it is entirely likely that the expedition would have been captured and eaten by the local tribes. They were lucky in that they avoided that in their moment of weakness. Anyway, they arrive in the central Philippines, the islands to the south of Taiwan and north of Indonesia, the Philippines that Magellan names after Philip, who's going to be the king of Spain. He's now crown prince. So, what happens in the Philippines? Well, they encounter natives who think that they're gods. They've never seen ships like this come out of the sea. They've never seen men this color who had hair the way Europeans have. They have guns. They have steel, shining star stuff that they wear. They have horses. No, they don't have horses. And the natives begin very, very much listening to everything that Magellan and his people say. And Magellan decides that he was brought there by God to spread Christianity. And then things go south. Magellan and his men commit a taboo. They reveal that they're not gods. And the mob drives them to the sea and kills Magellan as his few surviving men are fleeing to their last ship. So Magellan dies on Cebu in the Philippines. Del Cano, his first officer, sails the rest of the way back from the Philippines, again trying to avoid the Portuguese, and back home, which he arrives in Spain, in Cadiz. 5 large ships and a couple thousand men leave Spain. 1 ship with about 50 men arrive back home. That's the first journey of circumnavigation. So why is Magellan given credit for being the world's first circumnavigator and not Del Cano? After all, Magellan dies in the Philippines. He doesn't complete the journey. Well, here's why. Magellan, as a young man, had been to Ternate. He dies in the Philippines. Despite my stupid globe, the Philippines on Cebu are farther west, and Ternate is farther east. So when he arrived at Cebu, he had already been the first man to circumnavigate around the world. He had a manservant that he took from Ternate too. He's also the first, but they're not going to give him much historical credit. It's Magellan who gets it, because Magellan is the first man to have gone from one place around the world, completely around the world, to the other side and back again. Del Cano and his crew, though, they're right up there. So, this ends the great age of exploration, and it brings about something new, which we'll talk about next week, which is the age of the Great Exchange and the conquistadors, and finally the scientific revolution and the end of Unit 1 with an exam. For now, I hope you've enjoyed or at least gotten something out of today's lessons. That's what you have to write about. You have to write your paragraphs, 3 of them, about the lessons from this week, things that you learned, and remember, 3 paragraphs about that. And also by Wednesday morning, by 6 a.m. Wednesday morning, you need to have turned in your work on the Google Classroom assignment for the next chapter, which is the next chapter, 17, I think it is. Anyway, take care.